Everyone,
Good morning, Rabbi.
we're learning Mishnah is Chagiga, Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishnah Beis, Mishnah 2. All right, quick introduction. The Allah, we're dealing now, this Mishnah is going to deal with something that involves a personal carbon. Now, after a person brings a carbon, like we've been discussing, that on Yontif, a person brings a carbon Chagiga, carbon Eilis Re'iyah. These are all personal obligations that a person has to bring these offerings. And the halacha is that when you bring a personal offering, after the shechita, after you slaughter the animal, the owner places his hands on the head of the animal and leans down on it. Put your hands on the animal's head and you lean down on it. You basically put your whole weight down on the animal. And this is known as smicha, which means leaning. Okay, so now the question is going to be as to whether this smicha can be performed on yontif or not. You know, a person brings, if you're one of the ones who can get in to do it on yontif itself, you bring your personal carbon chagiga or carbon or oilas riyah on yontif itself. So now the question is going to be, can you do this smicha or not? Now, what's the issue? The issue is like this. There's a Isser D'Rabbanan, a rabbinic prohibition, to lean on an animal or to use an animal. We have the prohibition to use an animal on Shabbos. So, for instance, you're not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos, like Chachamim said, because they were concerned that while you're riding the animal and you want to get the animal to move, you're going to pull off a branch and start hitting it to get it to move. Pulling off a branch from a tree on Shabbos or Yom Tov is forbidden, and therefore they said no riding on an animal and no using of an animal, which means you cannot support yourself on an animal. So now in this situation, when you're going to go ahead, now actually I made a mistake. I said after the slaughtering, you lean your hand on it. It's not after the slaughtering, it's before the slaughtering that you lean your hand on it. So now, with that, we have an issue that if you're going to do smicha yontif, you are supporting yourself on the animal, and that's rabbinic prohibition. The question is, would there be a way to be able to say that the rabbinic prohibition can be waived in this kind of situation? You got a mitzvah, the Torah says to do smicha. It's rabbinic prohibition to lean on the animal. But maybe here in this situation where you have the mitzvah to fulfill and bring in your carbon, maybe the Rabbanan would waive it. Maybe the Rabbanan didn't took away their rabbinic prohibition for that. So let's read the Mishnah now. Yoisei ben Yoezer Oimer. The sage Yosef ben Yoezer said, "Shaloi lismeich, you may not lean on the animal when you bring it on yontif." Yosef ben Yochanan Oimer lismeich. Yosef ben Yochanan says, "No, you may do smicha on yontif itself." Okay, so now the issue is going to be like this, and this is going to be the argument that we're going to see carry through many generations. But the initial argument that started with Yosef ben Yoezer and Yosef ben Yochanan was that Yosef ben Yoezer holds that smicha does not have to be performed immediately before the slaughter of the offering, or even on the same day. Hence, when one offers an animal on yontif, smicha must be done the day before. If you say that you cannot do it on yontif, it's because you hold that you could do it the day before. You could do it erev yontif. So even though it's not the day of the slaughtering, it's not right before the slaughtering, doesn't make a difference according to Yosef ben Yoezer. You could do it the day before. So if you could do it the day before, that means that you can bring the carbon, you can bring the sacrifice, and not transgress the rabbinic prohibition. And therefore, if so, the rabbinic prohibition stands. You don't do the smicha on yontif, you do it the day before, because from the point of the law of the halacha of smicha, you can do it. It doesn't have to be done the same day. But Yosef ben Yochanan said no. Yosef ben Yochanan says that smicha must be performed right before the offering is slaughtered. And therefore, when an offering is brought on yontif, since its smicha must be done that day, the sages lifted their prohibition of using animals on yontif and permitted smicha. If I can't do the smicha any other day than yontif itself, because I have to do the smicha right before the shechita, Then therefore, therefore we say that the prohibition of using an animal, which would be when you're leaning on it, was something that Chachamim lifted, the Chachamim took away in this situation, being your carbon on Yontif. This argument went through many generations. Yeshua ben Prachya Oimer Shaloi Lismoich. The sage Yeshua the son of Prachya said not to lean. Nitai Beili Oimer Lismoich. Nitai, who was from Arbel, he said you lean. Yudah ben Tabai Oimer Shaloi Lismoich. Yudah son of Tabai said not to lean. Shimon ben Shetach Oimer Lismoich. Shimon ben Shetach said you may lean. Shmaya Oimer Lismoich. Shmaya said to lean. Avtalion Omer Shaloi Lismoich. Avtalion said not to lean. Okay, so you have to understand these are going through different generations. This isn't like a bunch of. We're not talking about here a number of sages that all live together, and we're talking about which one said yes this way, which one said that way. This is going through generations. All these pairs that are mentioned, these were the leaders of the Jewish people, as we will see very soon. And their leadership passed from one pair to the next pair to the next pair. So we're going through five. I call it generations. We're going through 5 periods, one after the other, of these sages who one permitted the smicha and one did not permit the smicha. Now, Hillel Menachem loy nechlaku. It says that Hillel. Now, who is Hillel usually paired up with? Shammai, right? But there was somebody before Shammai, and his name was Menachem. Menachem, that was his name. Doesn't say Menachem ben, it says Menachem. So Hillel and Menachem lo nechlaku. It says Hillel and Menachem didn't argue. Yatsa Menachem left. He kind of went out of the picture. V'nichna Shammai, and Shammai entered. Shammai oimer shalei lismaich. Shammai said not to lean. Hillel oimer lismaich. Hillel said to lean. Now the Mishnah tells us who these pairs were, or by each pair, who each one won. What was the position of each one? Harishayim ayunisiyim. The first ones mentioned of the 2 pairs, they had the position of nasi, prince, president. Ushaniyim lahem avos beistin. And the second ones mentioned, they were called the av beistin, the head of the court. Okay, so now Let's get a little bit of understanding behind these positions. For a period of time during the era of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Jewish people were led by pairs of sages, known as zugais, which means pairs. One sage of each pair was the Nasi, which they define as the president of the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish court. That's what he was called, the head of the Sanhedrin. And the other was the Av Beis Din, chief of the Sanhedrin, who was deputy of the Nasi. It was more like the Nasi was on top, and the Av Beis Din was the one who kind of ran things in the Bezdin, ran things in the Sanhedrin more on a daily basis. Their jobs, their positions also took on other forms. But this is primarily, we call him the Nasi. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the one. He was above everyone in the Sanhedrin, and then the Av Beis Din, he was the one who was the deputy of the Nasi, who basically, ran things in the Sanhedrin in a more call it day-to-day or practical way. Now, the first pair were the sages named above, meaning whoever is mentioned first is the Nasi, and the second one is the Av Beis Din. So in the first case, Yosef ben Yezer, he was the Nasi. Yosef ben Yechon was the Av Beis Din. Shua ben Prachya, that's the next pair of leaders. Shua ben Prachya was the Nasi. Nitar Bailey was the Av Beis Din. Yudah ben Tabai was the Nasi. Shimon ben Shetach was the Av Beis Din. Shmaya was the Nasi. Avtalion was the Av Beis Din. Now, then we have Hillel and Menachem. Now, what's interesting about Menachem is that, if you read the wording of the Mishnah, it says Hillel Menachem loy nechlaku. It says Hillel Menachem didn't argue. That's what it says. They didn't argue. So they didn't argue. It almost sound like they agreed, right? Now, the way the notes brings it is that Menachem never gave his opinion on the matter. It says loy nechlaku, didn't argue, means the Nasi had his say. He was the Nasi, and Menachem didn't say anything. The Bar Tanura says like this, and again, it gives us also an insight. What does it mean, Yatsa Menachem? Menachem went out. Menachem left. What did he leave for? So it says, the Bartanura says like this, Yatsa Menachem, la'avedas hamelach. Menachem left the position of Av Bezdin to serve, to do work for the king, to serve the monarchy, which was the Roman monarchy. Upirish miliyos chaveir shel Hillel, and he stopped being the colleague of Hillel. Lefikach, therefore, lo hoida me'inyanoi im nechlak im Hillel bazeh im lav. I'm not sure how to translate these words. It's not made known his opinion whether he argued with Hillel or not. Shammai took his position as the Av Bezdin, and he argued on Hillel. So it sounds to me from the Bartanura that he left his position, he left his rabbinic position, he went to work for the government, and therefore it's not known, or we don't let known. I'm not sure what the wording means. It's not known, what he held about this. Now I don't know what it means. It's not known. I mean, at point of time he was together with Hillel. So why wouldn't we know? And it's not like So unless by the time they got to discussing this, he had already left. I'm not sure. But the point is, when it says he didn't argue, and he left. It says he left his position in his position as being the Av Bezdin. He left his position of being the colleague of Hillel, and therefore it's not known or not made known what he held about this question about doing smich or not. Shammai took over his position, and Shammai did argue. Now, the Mishnah also says that everyone mentioned first of the two pairs. The first one is the prince. The second one is the Av Bezdin. There's one exception to that, just regarding the wording of the Mishnah. Because in the Mishnah reads, Shammai says not to lean, and Hillel says to lean. Shammai is first, but Shammai wasn't the Nasi, he was the Av Bezdin. So the point would be that, basically we mentioned Hillel first before, and then it says Menachem left and Shammai took his place, and therefore we mentioned what Shammai held, and then we mentioned what Hillel held. But it's not that Shammai was the Nasi and Hillel was the Av Bezdin, it was the other way around. Okay. All right. Chofetz Chaim wants to point out another thing that he sees is a very common problem. And not that in this problem there is any kind of permission of the fact that it was done publicly, but because it's a public issue, therefore he wants to address it. Somebody gave a drasha, somebody gave a sermon, someone gave a talk in the shul. You're not allowed to make fun of him afterwards. And you say, he had nothing to say. He doesn't make sense. There's not much to listen to what he has to say. And many people do that. They right away, somebody gets up to give a drasha, and don't forget, in times of the Chofetz Chaim, it was not the rabbi who was necessarily giving the drasha. There were magidim, there were people who went from city to city, and they spoke. They were darshanim, right? And people would come listen. All right, so people would come listen to the darshan, and what would they say about him? How was he? No, nothing special. Nothing much, nothing really to hear. When you do that, that is lashon hara without any question. Because lashon hara is when you say something derogatory about a person and you cause them any kind of damage or any kind of trouble, any kind of pain. Well, if you go ahead and you say about this darshan that he doesn't have much to say, you're going to be ruining his livelihood, because that's what people did. They did this going around and speaking as a livelihood. And the truth is also that it can cause embarrassment. Let's say it's true. Let's say he's really not that gifted. Nonetheless, even if it's true, it's still lashon hara. This guy who is putting the speaker down, what's his intention? Is it for a constructive purpose? Typically it's not. Typically it's to put the guy down. Now if you really care, adarabba, tzarich liyayitz le'achakach b'nei lebein atzmai laharak lefanav shemer b'fanim acherim shebe'ofen zeh shu omer ata ein davar nishmayim. You should do? Call him over privately and point out to him what he should improve on. Point out to him. And by doing that, he says, and by doing that, not only will you be helping him out, you will also, not only will you not be speaking Lashon Hara about him, you will actually be fulfilling the mitzvah of love your friend as yourself by helping him out. But nonetheless, and at the very least, not to make him a laughingstock by people. And in this situation, the fact that it was public and everybody knows about it, everybody sees he doesn't know what he's doing, so therefore it's public knowledge. There shouldn't be a problem saying it. No, because as he said before, there are many conditions for that. And here, where the point of what you're doing it is basically to put him down, therefore the permission of the fact that it can become that it's public does not apply. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.